Be my friend. Godfather.
Vito Andolini of Corleone, Sicily, later revered as Don Vito Corleone, is perhaps the most notorious mafia character in history. Not only was he respected in the world of the Godfather films, but he also inspired and was imitated by real-life mobsters, forever cementing his character as what every gangster dreams of becoming. He was wise, smart and powerful, with a unique skill in dealing with people. At the height of his power, Vito controlled the New York underworld, making him one of the most powerful and influential individuals in New York, and his influence spread all across the United States, and even abroad. Vito possessed both street smarts as well as a high level of intelligence and wisdom that he garnered through his difficult upbringing. He also understood people, as he was very perceptive and strategic, always knowing how to handle them in a way he would always benefit, with or without them knowing. He always saw through their attempts to manipulate or play him, turning it against them. But he did not do it in an arrogant manner, where people ended up disliking him. Rather, he aligned himself as an equal ally that can be relied on. But how did he really become as powerful as we see him in the film? And that's what we will be exploring in this video. We will go through how an orphan became one of the most powerful men in the criminal underworld and built an empire reaching the highest levels of wealth, power and respect. We will analyze all the events, including the ones not shown in the film, that led to this transformation. Maybe the single most important event that took place that propelled Vito into becoming as powerful as we knew him at the height of his power was dethroning Don Fanucci and taking over. This single event was the point in which Vito transformed into the wise mafia boss we now know. It allowed him to slowly wield power and influence in his neighborhood and slowly learn how to expand. So here's how it happened. New York, in 1917, Don Fanucci became aware of the partnership between Vito, Clemenza and 𝐕𝒂𝒕𝒂 and demanded that they wet his beak, in other words, pay tribute to him. Fanucci had threatened to inform the police if the trio didn't pay a substantial portion of their ill-gotten gains as everyone else. Clemenza and 𝐕𝒂𝒂 were alarmed and had wanted immediately to pay Fanucci, as they were intimidated by him, certain that he was backed up by the Mafia. While his friends were busy panicking, Vito calmly recalled everything he knew about Fanucci. He remembered that the boss walked the streets with no obvious protection, which had led to an incident where Fanucci was knifed by several neighborhood boys whose families he had tried to extort. He later murdered one of the boys, but had called off the vendetta after the families of the remaining two paid him an indemnity to forswear his vengeance. Basically, he got paid off. Vito guessed that Fanucci actually allowed himself to be bought off, because he had gotten lucky, and would be unable to kill the remaining two boys now that their guard was up, suggesting Fanucci worked alone without any major muscle he can send after them. Vito came to the realization that Fanucci only acted like he was a mob boss in front of easy-to-trick immigrants, as no mafioso would allow an assassin to live, even if paid enormous sums of money, and no member of any mafia would ever need or resort to informing the police as a threat. And as we know, Vito was from Sicily, therefore had seen what real mob bosses were like. He then came to the conclusion that Fanucci's life was not even worth the $600 he was asking for. So Vito asked his friends to leave everything in his hands to convince Fanucci to accept less money, telling his friends, When Vito later met with Fanucci, he offered only a fraction of the amount demanded, $100 of the $600 Fanucci expected. Fanucci is impressed with Vito's courage and offered him work. Vito interpreted his ability to lowball Fanucci as a sign of the latter's weakness, thus confirming his suspicion of Fanucci's vulnerability. Vito then allowed him to leave the building, so witnesses could confirm that he left alive. Vito had chosen the day of a major festival, and then we all know what happened.
We're fine.
So now with Fanucci dead, Vito earned the respect of the neighborhood, becoming known as a man of respect, and was soon asked to intercede in local disputes, gaining a reputation for never turning down someone who came to him for help and for being able to reason with unreasonable people. Although he had declined to do so at first out of modesty, Vito eventually started accepting gifts from local businesses and racket bosses in return for ensuring that our patrons know that they are safe, and Vito was soon making an enormous amount of money, just from accepting these so-called gifts. Vito, Clemenza and Tessio eventually took over the neighborhood, treating it with a great deal more respect than Fanucci did, and in turn they were taken care of in case they needed anything. In the 1930s, Vito has now become a force to be reckoned with. Establishing a powerful family, with the help of his close friends Peter Clemenza and Salvatore Tessio, who now have become his caporegimes. His old friend Genco Abbondando would become his consigliere. This is really when he was so respected, to the extent that even his closest friends began to refer to him as Don Corleone, or even Godfather. His illegal empire expanded from everything such as gambling, bootlegging, and sometimes murder when deemed necessary. However, Vito still had a very strict moral code of loyalty to his friends and above all, family. Unlike many others in his position, he was known as a kind, generous man who treated people with respect no matter their status in life. He was very firm on not engaging in what he called more destructive vices, such as drugs and prostitution. While understanding the streets and knowing very well the strength he possessed, he never considered himself or his organization as murderers. Which may seem odd, but in his mind he only used it as a tool when absolutely necessary, when he determined it was justice. Soon, his empire would continuously expand, further adding new members, however, never letting any outsiders too close into his inner circle. One vital individual that would become essential to the family was the feared Luca Brasi. Brasi was basically just a street guy. He wasn't part of any of the mob families or gangs, rather had a small crew of stick-up artists who were flourished during Prohibition in New York City. Their main revenue came from stealing shipments of other bootleggers, such as Mafia kingpin Joe Mariposa. They stored their stolen items in a warehouse in the Bronx, which also served as their base of operations. He did make a name for himself from a very early age, being well known for his extreme brutality. He was later arrested, however, when Vito needed a strong enforcer. He pulled some strings and got him out, in which earned Brasi's undying service and loyalty. But Brasi wasn't the only one who was saved by Don Corleone. Throughout his rise he helped many people with various problems and requests they had, financing the education and careers of bright young men who would soon become lawyers, assistant DAs, even judges. Large numbers of grateful Italians asked his advice on who to vote for in office elections, giving him a great deal of political power. He even hired a lawyer to organize a system of police payoffs, and insisted on paying as many officers as possible, whether they were needed at the moment or not, to ensure his favors drenched all those that he might request a service from in the future, and also protection and leverage he can hold over them if they dared to turn on him. In 1933, the repeal of Prohibition had dealt a huge blow to the Corleone family operations, but Vito Corleone had taken his precautions. He sent emissaries to the Don who controlled all the gambling activities of Manhattan, Salvatore Maranzano, a big shot of New York who had firm control in the crime underworld. The Corleone emissaries proposed to Maranzano an equal partnership deal beneficial to both parties. Vito Corleone, with his organization, his police and political contacts, could give him the necessary strength to expand his operations further and into new territories, such as in Brooklyn and the Bronx. But Maranzano rejected the Corleone offer, therefore setting off the Great War of 1933, which would ultimately change the whole structure of the underworld in New York City. Salvatore Maranzano had a powerful organization with a plethora of strong enforcers that obeyed his every command. He also had a friendship with Al Capone in Chicago, and had maintained a good relationship with the Tattaglia family, which controlled prostitution in the city, and what there was of the thin drug traffic at that time. Therefore, Maranzano sent a call to Capone for his two best gunmen to come to New York to assassinate Vito Corleone. But the Corleone family also had friends and intelligence in Chicago, who relayed the news that the two gunmen were arriving by train. So Luca Brasi and his men intercepted the Chicago soldiers at the railroad station and brought them to a warehouse near the docks and hacked them to pieces. A few days later in Chicago, Capone received a message from Vito which read, "You know now how I deal with enemies. Why does a Neapolitan interfere in a quarrel between two Sicilians? If you wish me to consider you as a friend, I owe you a service which I will pay on demand. A man like yourself must know how much more profitable it is to have a friend who, instead of calling on you for help, takes care of his own affairs and stands ever ready to help you in some future time of trouble. If you do not wish my friendship, so be it. But then I must tell you that the climate in this city is damp, unhealthy for Neapolitans, and you are advised never to visit it." And shortly after, the Capone sent back word that they would not interfere anymore. The odds were now equal, and Vito Corleone had earned an enormous amount of respect throughout the United States underworld with his humiliation of Capone. This incident was a turning point in the war. Maranzano had severely underestimated just how powerful and cunning the Corleone family really was. Soon, his own soldiers had lost faith in his ability to win. For 6 months Vito out-generaled Maranzano. He raided the crap games under his protection, located his biggest policy banker in Harlem, and had him hand over most of his money as well as important records and documents that could cripple his strength, and went all out on all his rackets and properties. He engaged his enemies on all fronts. Even in the garment centers he sent Clemenza and his men to fight on the side of the Unionists against the enforcers on the payroll of Maranzano and the store owners. And on all fronts his superior intelligence and organization guaranteed him victory. Clemenza's jolly ferocity, which Corleone employed judiciously, also helped turn the tide of battle. While Clemenza's regime hacked away at Maranzano's power structure, and in the process gaining loyalty of the unions who had been oppressed by Maranzano's men, Don Corleone then sent in the 𝐓𝒊𝒕𝒐 regime for the death blow, eliminating all those who stood in their way. By this time Maranzano had dispatched emissaries suing for peace. Vito Corleone refused to see them, as he never accepts an offer a second time. The Maranzano soldiers were deserting their leader, not wishing to die on the losing side. Bookmakers and loan sharks began paying the Corleone organization their protection money. The war was all but over. And then finally on New Year's Eve of 1933, 𝐶𝐞 got inside the defenses of Maranzano himself. The Maranzano lieutenants were anxious for a deal and agreed to lead sacrifice their Don. They told him that a meeting had been arranged in Brooklyn with Vito Corleone, and they would accompany him as his bodyguards. However, when the meeting was to take place, they left him sitting at a checkered table, woefully chewing a piece of bread, fleeing the restaurant as 𝐶𝐞 and 4 of his men entered. The execution was swift. Maranzano now had his mouth full of half-chewed bread and riddled with bullets. The war ended, and what was left of the former mighty Maranzano empire was incorporated into the Corleone operation. The Corleones had finally decimated Maranzano and his empire, and established themselves as the most powerful of the families in New York and a force to be reckoned within the whole criminal underworld.